we'll get going. So, hi everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces, new faces. I'm Phillip Meintzer. I'm a conservation specialist with Alberta Wilderness Association. Thanks to our board member Gail for helping facilitate and organize this. This is a nice space for us to hang out in. My colleague Ru Ping, another conservation specialist at AWA, is here with us. She's going to be sort of just watching tech support, making sure everything's working so that everything can go smooth tonight. So thanks everyone for being here and making this happen. I think I'm just going to start with a quick little land acknowledgement. I try to tailor these every time I do a talk. So I was thinking about this today. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all as a resident of Calgary. So I'm from Calgary, Alberta, or Mohkinstsis, in the language of the Blackfoot people. The province of Alberta exists within the settler state of Canada and overlaps with treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and a bit of 10. I'm giving this presentation tonight from Edmonton, which is located in Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. This is the traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, Stoney, Saulteaux, and Blackfoot peoples. So as a born and raised Calgarian, I'm responsible to my obligations under Treaty 7. And as a descendant of European colonizers, I feel that I have a responsibility to atone for the mistakes or intentional harm of my ancestors. My work with AWA provides me with an opportunity to contribute in a small way and hopefully meaningful way. No, yeah, sure. My work with AWA hopefully lets me contribute in a meaningful way towards the act of reconciliation. I'd like to ask all of you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional lands from wherever you're joining us from, and think about how you can make reconciliation an ongoing part of your daily lives. Reconciliation isn't this static target. It's an ongoing process to which all of us must commit if we're to build an equitable and sustainable future for all. Thanks. So, McClelland, let's talk about the place first. So a lot of people, a lot of the battle with AWA in sort of pushing back against this broader project at McClelland is getting people to understand that this exists. Like, this is here in our province. It's this beautiful, large wetland complex. It's not just the spectacular pattern fen you see in the image. There's other wetlands there. There's the large McClelland Lake. There's sinkhole lakes, and there's plenty of other wetlands that are peatlands. There's boreal forest. It's like a diverse ecosystem, and we have this in our province. It's up in the oil sands region, which is, I think, part of the problem. It's out of sight, out of mind for most Albertans. It's not a place people normally recreate, although people do. And so, part of the battle has been getting people to sort of understand that this is like a place we have. It's beautiful. Indigenous communities have a relationship with the area. They historically had a relationship with the area, and it's worthy of protection. So let's just go get people situated, figure out where we are. So on the map in the top left corner, you can kind of see where McClelland is, like roughly within the province of Alberta. So it's 90 kilometers northeast of Fort McMurray. So about like an hour, maybe a little bit more. It depends if you get stuck in the sand, right, Sherry? And so it's, just over an hour's drive from Fort McMurray. On this map, you can see sort of there's this boundary with the sort of diagonal blue lines. That's the broader watershed. That's not necessarily the wetland complex. The wetland complex is sort of the lake extending to this gray and green. So the gray area, gray-blue to the sort of southeast or southwest is the wetland complex. And then within that, the green area is the spectacular pattern fen, which I'm sure many of you have seen from imagery, but if not, you'll see plenty of photos tonight. So this just gives you an idea of where this is situated in sort of an Alberta context. Why is McClelland important? It's been described as provincially significant. So there's been like processes that have sort of assessed the area as sort of ecologically significant. The wetland complex is not larger than 91% of all of Alberta's wetlands, so it's quite large. Wetlands are important because they filter fresh water. So especially like peat, it just sort of like acts as this sponge, clears the water, cleans it out. Also, we're learning more and more. Indigenous communities sort of had a knowledge of this in the past, but sort of like Western science is only recently validating that these peatlands sort of serve as, because it's a wet sponge, they serve as this sort of buffer of the impacts of wildfire. So if we think back to this summer, sort of historic burns across Canada, North America, wetlands are important because they not only sort of like slow the spread of wildfire, but then sort of, if you picture like a wetland being in between two different ecosystems, it also kind of prevents the hopping of the wildfire from like one side to the other. So it has this buffering effect. McClelland itself is a biodiversity hotspot. I think it's 205 bird species have been identified to use the area or within the area. 4 of those bird species that are regularly found there are listed as species at risk. Whooping cranes have been observed to use the area, but they only sort of transit through. There's no nesting there. If there was, we may have a stronger angle for protecting it, but unfortunately they just sort of pass through. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's a breeding area and stopover point for migratory birds, which is important to note because, again, this is in the oil sands region. It's close to Fort McMurray. It's surrounded on all sides by different mines, which means there's tailing ponds everywhere. And so if you're thinking of sort of all these large water bodies scattered across the landscape, McClelland is sort of the last largest remaining freshwater body that's there. So if birds are migrating from like the south to north, from north to south, you know, twice a year as they do, they're going to need a place to rest. And so, you know, part of why we want to protect this area is because the McClelland Lake serves as this sort of safe landing place because you're in a region that's just dominated by tailings, and the impacts to birds can be quite severe if they land. And even if the birds aren't harmed when they land on tailings, there's this host of literature that talks about sort of the sublethal effects or delayed lethality. So it's like as when they leave, we don't really know what happens, but like they're presumed to be impacted or killed. And then on top of this, again, it's a peatland, or you know, it holds a lot of peatlands. And so peat, as it grows, it pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it in its tissues. Actually, I think we'll go next slide. Yeah, here. So the pattern fen specifically, there are places within the wetland complex that are around 8 meters deep of peat. And so if you think about peat growing, it grows maybe about 1 millimeter a year. So over time, like that's going to accumulate and grow and grow and grow. And so now you've got these deposits of peat that are 8 meters deep, but that takes 8,000 to 11,000 years to form. So a long time. It takes tons of time to grow and relatively little time to destroy. But yeah, so this is a photo of the fen. It's called a pattern fen. There are other fens, like fens exist whether they're patterned or not, but the patterning is sort of a product of a lot of time and sort of the direction of water flow. So we don't have to get too into it, but that's sort of what leads to this really cool like patterning of the trees where they're up high on these peat ridges called strings, and then the depressions. This looks dry here, but like if you press down, it's probably wet. And sometimes, like depending on precipitation, it can just be like fully submerged. So strings and flarks. So dense carbon storage. The woman who was helping us with our assessment of Suncor's plan, she pulled together sort of a rough estimate. It's not like sort of super concrete, but she said that the whole wetland complex could probably store 35 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is, just to give you like a comparison, that's the same amount of all emissions from the province of Manitoba roughly in a single year. So everything that's going on in Manitoba in 1 year added up would be what we risk sort of like releasing into the atmosphere from digging up McClelland or the peat at McClelland. Just photo, like nice photo. I had the pleasure of visiting in September, so we did a flyover, got tons of nice aerial imagery, but it just really sort of re-emphasizes that patterning that happens with the strings of trees, and then the flarks are the sort of depressions in between. And then just an example of some of the species. Oh, I don't know if we can minimize is that me? I'll do this. There we go. That's better. Yeah, some of the species that use the area, again, whooping cranes, river otters, sandhill cranes, great blue herons, I believe as well, pitcher plants. So my former colleague and supervisor, Carolyn Campbell, she went up and visited the area and she saw pitcher plants in person. Really cool. I didn't get to see them when I was there. But I didn't even know we had them in Alberta until I started learning about this area. So that just speaks to my ignorance. and yeah, Canadian toad, but among other wildlife, black bears. Caribou sometimes use the area, but I've talked to Indigenous community members who say that they prefer to stay sort of more north, but it's used, it's caribou habitat. It's just like they're just not there all the time. So a bit of AWA history with the area. As far as I can see, and in talking to colleagues, Alberta Wilderness Association has been seeking to protect the area since the early 90s. We have documentation kind of going back to at least 1994, but I think probably earlier. And it's sort of just like whatever we've held on to or retained. And so, yeah, since the early 90s, we participated, AWA did, in a sort of land use planning process between 1994 and 1996. So you'll see here this second bullet, and it actually got the McClelland Lake Wetland Complex set off limits to oil sands mining under what was now known at the time was a integrated resource plan, which was a land use plan for the area for the Athabasca oil sands region, and somehow between then and like 2002, where sort of all this kicks off, True North Energy, which was the sort of proponent for this Fort Hills mine at the time, they somehow acquired leases despite the protections that were given to the area in 1996. True North Energy were a subsidiary of Koch Industries, so the Koch brothers out of the States, like large investment firm, tons of oil and gas investing. So they were owned by the Koch Industries, and from what I've heard, it was just sort of like lobbying efforts on their behalf to try and get these leases, and they managed to after essentially 1 billion barrels of oil were found underneath the fen. And so it led to them lobbying to get these leases. From what I've heard, I don't have a ton of like physical written evidence. This is anecdotal from coworkers. And then again, so just while all this is ongoing, again, the leases were somehow given out in 1998, but at the same time, while it's protected, in 1999, the area was nominated as an ecologically significant area by this Special Places 2000 initiative, which just sort of like looked across all of Alberta and identified like tons of locations that they thought were significant and maybe worth protecting. It didn't end up making the final list of things that were protected under the Special Places 2000, but it was nominated. So just recognizing the importance of the area. And then, yeah, okay, then in 2002, the Energy and Utilities Board, which I believe is the precursor to the AER, made the decision to permit mining in half of the wetland complex with conditions, which we'll get to. This is just, don't worry about reading this deep. It's just sort of examples. All I want to use this as an example for is just sort of how long AWA has been working on this. So this is from February 2002 and July 2002. So these are around the time of those Energy and Utilities Board hearings, just talking about the work that AWA is doing to try and protect the area and highlight the importance. Fort Hills Oil Sands Mine. What is it? Mordor. Mordor. It is currently owned now 100% by Suncor. Recently, French company Total was still like a partial owner. It was already majority owned by Suncor, but now Suncor owns 100% of the mine stake. It's been operational since 2018, so a lot of people like are sort of like that. There's a sunk cost issue here. You know, Suncor has invested to have like this existing mine that's now already there outside of the wetland complex, and you know they're anticipating to be able to move into the complex itself. Again, in 2002, mining was permitted for half of the wetland complex, but in their approval conditions, it's like as long as they're able to guarantee the ecological diversity and function of the unmined half. So again, this is a wetland, peatland, tons of groundwater, and so it's all connected. The whole area is connected, and so they're allowed to mine half of it, but with no impacts to the other half, which is it's always seemed a stretch for us. And yeah, so we'll get into like sort of poking holes into like why that's a stretch. Anyways, Suncor are sort of like planning, they're permitted, the AER approval says that they can start ditching and draining in the wetland complex in 2025. So like just over a year now. This is just getting back to that 2002 decision. And again, this is just, you don't have to read the whole thing here, but it's again, in the conditions, you can see that the protection of the non-mine portion of the McClelland Lake Wetland Complex and maintaining the ecosystem diversity and function of the non-mine portion of the wetland complex during both operation and reclamation. So again, this is just sort of saying the conditions that Suncor needs to meet as part of this operational plan they develop in order to be allowed to go in and do the mining. Suncor's operational plan. So what is it? It was submitted to the AER in December of 2021. So I joined AWA in spring, like May of 2021. So very early on, sort of, Carolyn was just like, hey, we know that this is sort of incoming. Just we had to be paying attention to when it was submitted. When it got submitted, AWA requested a copy. The AER and Suncor got us a copy, but it's like more than 1,900 pages of like stuff way beyond my expertise. It's split into 6 different sections. Doesn't really matter that much, but we needed to essentially take this document and review the document to make sure that what Suncor submitted meets those conditions that we just sort of looked over. So does the document actually put together a plan that can guarantee no impacts to the unmined side? And so what is their plan? It's too perfect, right? So they want to build, I mean, this is not the only piece of it, but it's definitely a big chunk of this is Suncor is planning to build a huge underground wall that they call the cutoff wall to split the non-mine portion, which is northeast, and then the mine portion, which is southwest. So the wall is going to be about 14 kilometers long, up to 80 meters deep in places, and that's like a 20-story building underground, essentially. Yeah, to split the wetland complex in two. Again, it's not just a wall. It's like, it's not, you know, the way they've talked about it is it's not static. They have all these plans for wells and pumps and pipelines to try and, again, this is a groundwater connected wetland. They have to mimic the flow, the natural flow in the non-mine half, because if you don't, then the conditions to maintain the peatlands, everything on that side is dependent on that water flow. So yeah, so not only are they proposing this giant underground wall, but like for the next, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades, it has to work perfectly to maintain, you know, natural conditions of water flow so that nothing happens to the unmined side. So again, even without reviewing this plan, it feels like a long shot. Like it feels high risk. It's just like a big technological sort of fix that they've put together, and with, you know, and like nothing to discredit the work that went into this operational plan. There are like very talented experts I know that like work for Suncor and pull these things together, but still feels like a long shot. So we, again, just, this is sort of like a brief timeline of sort of the activities that have happened. Again, December 2021, that operational plan was submitted by Suncor to the AER. In January of 2022, we got our copy finally. And then there's a big time span here, February to August 2022. It took me like 7 months to find just two experts who were willing and able to review Suncor's plan and who didn't have like contractual obligations to oil sands companies or have conflicts of interest because of existing or ongoing or future work in the oil sands. So I reached out to like, I don't know, 25 different people over that time, trying to just also, anytime I would reach out to someone, it would not just be like, it's not just asking if they can do it, it's if they can't, can you even recommend anybody else? So it just took a long time. And you know, that just feeds into this sort of the rest of the timeline where August 2022, we were able to sign this contract with Dr. Lorna Harris of WCS and Dr. Kelly Biaggi of Brock University to do their independent review of the operational plan, which is the September to December period. But in the middle of that, I just sort of reached out to the AER just asking for the timelines on when they were expecting to be done reviewing the plan. And they were like, oh, it's already approved. It was approved in September. And so I was like, oh no, bad news. But we had, either way, like regardless, we still had to get our review done. And whatever the results of the review were, we just needed to get that in front of the AER. So that didn't change sort of our actual activities. It just meant, it was just sort of a gut punch. It's like, oh, AER has already approved this. Of course they have. Let's just try to work faster. Anyways, so yeah, it took a bit of time to get the report fully completed. That was end of March of this year, 2023. And on March 31st, I submitted our report that was pulled together by Dr. Harris and Dr. Biaggi, and sent that to the AER.
Does the AWA have to pay your experts?
In this case, we did, yeah. I mean, we wanted to, because we also recognize the size of the undertaking, and it's sort of more, if you have money to offer, I think people are more willing to take on the work. It's not a small task. So yeah, we did contract both Dr. Harris and Dr. Biaggi and paid them to do the work. But I'll touch on it a bit later. Ever since sort of since our campaign has really kicked off, other experts have then reached out to do sort of like surface level reviews of their own. And so we've gotten now supplemental expert opinions, but initially we paid them to do the work. So here's our report. That's just the cover, nice and exciting, cool. What do we see? Anyways, you don't have to read all of these. This is just sort of the science behind, like, these were the criticisms that Kelly and Morna, so Dr. Harris and Dr. Biaggi, these are the concerns that were raised from their review. So there were things like not addressing saline contamination of freshwater, which just means as you dig, you have all this fresh water up top, you're gonna like release salts from down below as you dig, and that can get into both groundwater, and because it's all sort of connected and flows, those salts can make their way to the surface and then have impacts for all of this vegetation. Like that vegetation hasn't developed to grow with like excess salt, so that can cause changes. Anyways, if you want to learn more about any of these specific items, please read the report. All this is sort of trying to get across is that we found stuff, like we found various concerns, and again, going back to the 2002 approval conditions, it was supposed to guarantee that there would be no impact to the diversity and function in the unmined side, and this raised questions. That's all. Like it just didn't look foolproof, and so we thought that was worthwhile to submit to the AER and just say, hey, like you've already approved this, but we've had experts review it. They saw this, and we think you should reconsider. Yeah, and again, so this is just sort of the broad conclusions from what we saw. The operational plan can't guarantee the protection of the unmined wetland complex. The operational plan poses a significant risk of irreversible damage to the unmined portion. It comes off as this massive high-risk water management experiment. It potentially violates those initial approval conditions we went over, and we feel that the operational plan shouldn't have been approved by the AER. And so when we submitted everything, we asked them to reconsider and revoke their approval. Since then, we've been fortunate to get like various levels of like news coverage, which kind of gets McClelland again. Part of this battle is helping Albertans to understand that this place is there, it's important, and then this is happening or incoming. So you know, the work has been profiled by Drew Anderson a few times in the Narwhal, Bob Weber and Paula Duhatchik for CBC. Bob Weber as well. That was a Globe and Mail one on that side. Markham Hislop, who has this Energy Talks podcast and Energy Media, where he just talks about the energy industry, but on the news side, he actually met with one of our experts that we hired. So Dr. Lorna Harris and Markham sat down and did like a deep dive. It's like 50 minutes talking about the flaws she saw in the plan. So that was really nice. I'm grateful that she did that, because it's sort of, if anyone's sort of interested in learning the deeper stuff that she noticed from doing her assessment, it's all like, you can just listen to her talk about it. So I'm just gonna take a sip of water while we look here. This is from our trip again back in September. This is not the pattern fen. This is kind of to the northeast of the lake. So just another fen, I'm pretty sure.
So the areas where there are trees, a human could walk there, but all the other areas you would sink.
Yeah, and so that's it, because it's peat, it can be quite dangerous to even like attempt to walk on some of these areas, because it's like a sponge, so you don't know how firm the footing is, and especially towards the edge of the lake. I mean, Sherry and I tried to walk up, and like there's sections where, I mean, every time you step, you squish down, your feet get wet, but also peat can grow in this way where closer to the lake, you'll get sort of like, they're called like peat islands. And so they sort of start to grow out over the water. And so the risk is that you could actually like fall through and be trapped under the peat, like, but in the water. So I met with an Indigenous elder who grew up with like in close relationship with the area. And when we were going out, she just said, don't walk anywhere. She was like, if you don't know the area, just like, don't walk. So yeah, around the trees, there's definitely more like actual like, terrain to sort of like walk on. But again, like I wouldn't be, unless it was in the winter and you're going by like on the snow. Yeah, I wouldn't be like venturing out there. Maybe there are experts who know their way around, but I just didn't want to get trapped. Okay, so the reconsideration process. We were surprised in like in a good way, because again, AER had already made their decision. And we weren't sure what the response was going to be when we submit this report. So the lawyers we worked with raised this option. It's under the Responsible Energy Development Act. It's called like, it's this request for reconsideration. And it's for instances of like new information or extraordinary new information. And so they were like, just submit and ask for that. And so that's what we did. And the AER got back to us and they said, we'll open up a reconsideration process. We'll reconsider our decision. The AER, I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there that it operates as a captive regulator and sort of like operates the whims of industry. So we were surprised that that even happened in like a very good way. And I think we lucked out in the most tragic circumstances possible, because we submitted this hot on the heels of the leak at the tailings ponds at Curl. So the Imperial Curl mine leak happened. It's just like the news came out just a few weeks prior. So there was this intense scrutiny and prolonged scrutiny on the AER around the time we submitted, which was like something we can't plan for, and also extremely unfortunate because like that's impacting Indigenous communities and the environment. But I think it maybe is part of why we got to even this part. So grateful for that despite the harm. Over the summer, so from the start of May to the end of July, was phase 1 of this reconsideration process. So that meant essentially we just bundled up our initial report as like a first submission again. Like we submitted ours, but then they're like, we'll open this process, let's do this all officially. So we resubmitted our report as well as some other supporting sort of evidence and arguments from the lawyers we've been working with. And then Suncor gets a reply, and then we get another reply, and then we were supposed to only be replying to Suncor's, but essentially they said that we raised new information, so Suncor got another response. So it was 2 and 2. And that ended at the end of July, and waiting on an AER decision as of November 4th now. So the AER, I've reached out and I was sort of asking like timelines for this kind of thing, and they said, no, they can't give us a firm deadline for when their decision is coming, but they try to make all decisions within 90 days of the final submission. So that would have been July 27th. That would have taken us to October 25th. So we're already past their window, but again, they did no promises. So that's kind of where things are at now. We've submitted our report. We've done the submissions as part of the reconsideration process. And then as we were sort of waiting, it's not just the regulatory stuff, it's all of the campaign materials, all of the public outreach, stuff like this, communications, Amy's help on social media to put out like useful posts just to get others educated through social media. It's not just on the regulatory side, because again, a huge part of this battle is just getting Albertans to know about this place and hopefully care a bit more than they did before that. So yeah, that's sort of where we're up to now. Okay, then this is I wanted to briefly touch on this piece. I had mentioned that originally it was supposed to be 2 submissions from AWA and then the one sort of sandwiched reply from Suncor in the middle. But when you asked if we paid our experts to do this review, the initial 2 we did, Lorna and Kelly, we paid, but then new evidence we received. We just have like colleagues, friends, allies, experts that we've worked with in the past from AWA's perspective or side of things, who caught wind of our campaign and they reached out like to support. So they were like, the 3 of them, Dr. Kel Weeder, R. Kelman Weeder, he's out of Villanova University in the States. He's been involved in the oil sands monitoring program here in Alberta. So I know him through that program. And then Richard Lindsay, who works sort of for like a broader wetland ecology group in the UK. And then Dr. David Lockheed, who's here, I think he's actually based in Edmonton. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, and so the three of them, sorry.
No, you obey?
Again, if anyone wanted to come for like I poked and prodded, so as many people as possible to get involved, and I did reach out to two experts, I've reached out to experts at U of A, not two experts. But yeah, so far, everyone who's been involved are the only people who've come forward and said they could or were willing to. So yeah, no one specifically from U of A. But the three other experts provided sort of just, again, their own opinion of Suncor's plan. There was no, this is a big one for us. There was no testing of Suncor's plan. So again, 14-kilometer long wall, up to 100 meters deep in some places, putting a wall through a groundwater connected wetland. There's not a lot of evidence of this having been done before anywhere. And so not even a test case. Like there's nothing in the operational plan that says like we took a small little fen and did like a mock-up. So that's a red flag for us. Suncor's response is that this is all going to be based on their tried and tested tailings technology, and like we see how well that works lately.
Dump it in the river.
Yeah, and so yeah, just again further red flags, and then other things again. Just these are all available on like AWA's website if you want to go deeper and deeper into these. Yeah, no consideration for potential catastrophic changes. So it's like, what happens if something does like go really bad? There's no, that's not acknowledged. Yeah, so again, so we had those initial 7 concerns from Lorna and Kelly's sort of like deeper review, and then these other experts came forward with another sort of 7 or so major concerns. So we're up to 14 when there was supposed to be 0. We submitted that to the AER, and that's when they were like, okay, you weren't supposed to submit new information. We'll give Suncor a chance to respond. And they did. But anyways.
I have a curious question.
Yeah, of course.
So like, having been a scuba diver in my youth.
Yeah.
I know that, you know, when you're in the ocean or a lake, you can put on gear and go down there and look at things.
Mm-hmm.
But like in this kind of a situation, does anybody even know what it looks like 80 feet below the surface?
Yeah, I mean, there are existing well sites, like, well, like not, and I don't mean like oil wells, but wells that are like for like sampling. So sampling well sites, like when we flew over, you can see various locations where like some sort of small infrastructure is there, because, you know, Suncor has spent the last, I don't know, 10 years developing the operational plan. So they do go out and they do work to sort of look, and I'm sure they've done like, you know, core samples or whatever they need. But it's, again, like, I'm not an expert on that sort of thing. So like, even if they have gone and sampled what it's like 80 meters deep, like, does that necessarily mean you can like dredge like out 80 meters, even actually at Fort Hills at the existing mine, which is right now outside of the wetland complex. I think it was in 2020, Suncor was having issues. It was in the news that they were having, as they were mining, they were getting a lot of like water flow back into the mining area. So into the mining pit, water was flowing. And I just assume that that's going to be the same as soon as, and again, they're going to have to build the wall first, because there can be no damage to the unmined side. So you got to go in, and I think as soon as they start even digging out for the wall, there's going to be impacts. So it's trying to even prevent that from going ahead.
What is the wall going to be made of?
There's like what is it called? They use it in tailings. Like there's going to be concrete structures, but like the curtains and stuff. I think bentonite, is that what they call it? Is it? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So again, like that's not I'm not an expert on sort of the engineering of the wall side. I wish we actually could have like a full engineering review of the actual infrastructure itself. We focus more on sort of whether or not what's being proposed is going to sort of have ecological impacts in the unmined side. That was sort of where we targeted first. And it was also just a case of finding someone to help. So we just don't have we haven't had someone do a rigorous review of the wall and sort of all the engineering components, but maybe we don't have to, because we've already seen all of these concerns.
Have they costed the wall?
I've been asked that, and I don't know what the cost of this is going to be. Yeah, I imagine it's huge, but they're also, I guess, like 1 billion barrels of oil, like makes it seem
It's still gonna cost a lot of money.
Yeah, so, yeah, okay, so that's kind of where we're at now. This is sort of like other things that I think are important to consider, but are not actually a piece of this whole regulatory fight. Suncor right now is proposing another mine expansion of their base mine. So it's the base mine extension project and, it's okay, base mine extension. And so that's closer to Fort McMurray. That's where base mine is. It's this huge new mine footprint. And it's currently undergoing like a federal impact assessment. I just reviewed sort of the documents that are in there just to sort of just see like, again, this was all approved with conditions that were set in 2002. So they weren't thinking about emissions at all. There's no consideration for emissions in the Fort Hills mine. But this here is, so this is base mine extension. And in Minister Guilbeault's, like federal environment and climate change minister, this is his initial letter. This is like before the impact assessment has actually happened, just sort of like a cursory glance at what's being proposed with this base mine extension. And he's like, you know, emissions at this level may not align with the pace and scale of reductions required to achieve our targets. And that would hinder Canada's international commitments in respect to climate change. Great. As such, I'm of the opinion that the project as currently proposed would likely cause unacceptable environmental effects within federal jurisdiction. So this is what happens when you like get a mine reviewed, at least right now, federally. But it's been really difficult to like for us because we talk about sort of the emissions footprint that the Fort Hills mine is going to have if it digs at the peat at McClelland, but that's like not any like there's no regulatory lever or avenue there because it's like the conditions were set in 2002 and no one was talking that way. So it's completely ignored. We've highlighted it over and over again, but it's something that we want to get across to the public just to show the sort of contradictory approach between like 22 years ago and now. Like if, you know, again, the mine isn't in the wetland complex. Yes, the Fort Hills mine exists, but the mine's not in the wetland complex. So it's like, it's not too late to be like, hey, can we get it looked at? But there's no real avenue to do so, as much as we want it to happen.
The Impact Assessment Act.
Yeah.
There's been publicity about that recently.
Yeah.
So does that no longer apply?
I've only briefly sort of brushed up on sort of the Supreme Court's decision about the Impact Assessment Act, and it was more essentially Alberta's been talking about it as if it sort of like null and voids the Impact Assessment Act, but that's not really the case. Other lawyers I've talked to say it's just going to need some revised wording, and it might mean that certain projects are less applicable for a federal assessment, but I don't think it would impact this particular project. But again, that's not my, I haven't sort of looked at it that way or brushed up. And I'm not really assessing base mine extension. No. It's closer to Fort McMurray. Not that we want any more oil sands mines, but it's in like an already developed area. It's not impacting sort of an intact wilderness area. Doesn't mean it's not important to fight, but I was mostly just highlighting the sort of contradictory approach between sort of a mine that's been proposed recently and one that was proposed and approved back in 2002.
But wouldn't that Impact Assessment Act apply to McClelland?
They had an impact assessment done. So an impact assessment was conducted back in the early 2000s, and the Energy and Utilities Board, as part of those 2002 hearings that gave the approval, they permitted True North Energy to set aside their impact assessment. They were like, you can put your impact assessment aside and build this operational plan instead. So yeah, I wish it was, that's been part of the difficulty is right now, it's all to do with the provincial government and there's very little avenue for us to get the federal and government involved. And even if we could, there's always jurisdictional headbutting. So whether the feds would even want to take on like a jurisdictional battle with Alberta right now is like, on other files that I'm on, that they shy away from it. So yeah, that has been part of the trouble with this one. So recently, as part of my trip in September, Amy and I got to go up and see McClelland, but we also were connected with an Indigenous elder, Barb from Fort McKay First Nation. She recently was profiled in CBC's article about this, about the mine and the expansion. So we had the privilege of sitting with her for, 5 hours around her kitchen table, having too much coffee and hearing stories. She lived really close to McClelland, like until she was 15. She lived essentially in the bush, she says, in and around the area. She's grown up with the area. She has like a relationship with she knows the specific blue herons that she goes and sees all the time. She knows her berry picking spots where medicines used to be harvested. So we had just like the privilege of, she was the first Indigenous community member who was willing to sort of speak with us directly about McClelland. She also participates on what's called the Sustainability Committee, which is the committee Suncor put together to help build their plan. She was on it for Fort McKay First Nation as a Indigenous knowledge holder. So she's just there to help inform with Indigenous knowledge the operational plan, but she's still very much against the plan. She's just there essentially so that the industry can sort of meet their consultation needs, but she doesn't necessarily feel that her voice has been included, and she feels that sometimes her statements are mischaracterized. So it was great to both meet someone who has an actual direct connection with the area, and who was willing to speak out about it, having participated on sort of the committee as well. So she has kind of an insider perspective. The communities themselves, a lot of them cannot speak out, as a nation as a whole, for various reasons. So we rely on sort of individuals to come forward, and essentially they can come forward as an individual. They're just not like a representative of the community. So yeah, but yeah, these are just sort of quotes from hers. She had tons of stories. Going up and visiting McClelland was great. I got to see the flyover, but my favorite part was just spending 5 hours at Barb's kitchen table and learning about it. Because now I fight for her. And that's kind of the end of the spiel. That's where we're at. I again just thank all of you for coming out to hear me talk about this. It's nice. I do so much. I spend so much time writing about McClelland, and there's only so much I can write. Only so many different ways I can write about it. So to actually have time to speak and hopefully here's this. If any of your questions, dialogue. I'd be more than happy to answer questions. Yeah.
So when we look at this picture,
yeah,
this beautiful space.
Yeah.
How many acres is that?
Acres, I'm actually not sure. So it's massive. I mean, if we go here, also, this is a good photo for people to get sort of context of what's proposed to be mined. So we're kind of looking east. So this is the fen on the southwest side. So I'll actually just quickly go back to my earlier slide with the map. So again, we were sort of, that photo's looking this way across east. So you can see the fen's all here. And again, if you remember from the other map.
Why do you have that map?
And then, so this is, you can see again how much of the fen kind of extends again, down this way. So half of the fen is for sure going to be dug up.
Is there a scale on that map?
Yeah, what do we got here?
Oh, yeah, there we go. So
Yeah.
it's 2,000.
So 2
basically
kilometers.
Kilometers. So that'll give you an idea. Of the
Yeah.
area.
Yeah, it's massive.
So are there active mines right now near McClelland Lake?
So Fort Hills is right here right
It's
now.
that far away, okay.
Yeah, actually, I'll pull this up. I wanted to actually show a few photos. If I stop sharing, we'll go back in a second, but I will share my screen. Just share my whole screen. Is that coming through on your own, Ruping? My whole screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll show you a few of the photos from this flyover that we did. And then you can also see there is a photo in here. There's a photo in here of where the Fort Hills mine is while I'm above the fen. So maybe I'll go to that one first. Here. So we're flying just over the wetland complex, and you can see that's Fort Hills. So it's going to be working its way eastward towards us.
What do you hear, Phillip, at night when you're down?
Yeah. So I was explaining to Gail earlier that again it's an intact wilderness area, still relatively undisturbed, but outside of the wetland complex, there's mines everywhere. So, we can.
Oil sands mines.
Oh.
yeah.
Yes, and so, even though you're in this like, relatively beautiful pristine wilderness area, Sherry and I went and we paddled the lake and we camped. And, but even at night, like you're expecting it to be sort of like tranquil and pristine and natural, but like you hear in the distance, like boom, 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 which are the bird cannons for the tailings ponds. So it's it's a beautiful area, like scenically, the actual like topography is still intact and beautiful, but, it's a eerie feeling like being sort of alone in the woods in the middle of the night and you still just hear like cannons going off.
So just a couple questions from online.
Sure.
Great informed presentation, thank you. You may, like me, be happy to see no more mining of oil sands, but that I likely unrealistically politically right now. So in the case that is too dreamy, of the Northern Boreal ecozone, what habitat can be forfeited, in your opinion, REWAs?
Maybe just the question, so I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, you want to
Sorry.
hear, yeah, let's do it, repeat again.
Well, maybe you could just rephrase it so we can hear what you're answering.
Sure.
Of the Northern Boreal ecozone, what habitat can be forfeited, in your opinion, REWAs?
I think now, like, it's more so, okay, let's say like, oil sands mining or like oil production from the oil sands doesn't stop today. We could just extract what's in the existing mines. So just because like we still need like there is like a broader discussion that needs to be had about sort of energy transition, but like the longer we wait, the more harmful that transition is going to be, both in terms of environmentally and like to like Albertans, like as a workforce, as our economy. So the longer we wait, the steeper that decline is going to be to go from like this much fossil fuel energy to like this much fossil fuel energy. If we can prolong it, like that means starting early. The earlier we can start that transition down, the less sort of like perceived impact that should hopefully have on us. So it's not so much about like, I don't think we should be, picking and choosing like winners and losers. Like all of these environments are important. We have existing mines that are still going to continue producing. We just don't need expanding new ones. I think like if this mine is supposed to be operational until 2060, we're supposed to be at 45% emission, like cut to 45% emissions, or cut 45% of our emissions by 2030, and that's what, like 6 years from now. So to have a new mine or an expanded mine start in 2025, that's going to go until 2060, that not only releases carbon from the peat destruction, but we're putting in a mine, like, so an oil sands mine, there's emissions from the actual production, and then there's downstream emissions when that's burned. It all just is a bad mix. So, we always advocate for protecting places that are relatively intact, like places that are relatively still wild. So lower human disturbance, which is why McClelland is a important place for us. So yeah, I mean, if we have to pick places, then maybe it's places that are already significantly developed. But again, I just don't think we should be picking sort of winners and losers here when we have existing mines that can sort of keep producing oil as we phase down.
Why did they decide to do half of it? What was the rationale for that?
Yeah.
Because if you didn't, if you either left it alone or did the whole thing, you wouldn't have to bother with this silly wall. And what's rationale there?
No,
They thought maybe that, with the rare species and so on, that this would be sufficient mitigation. Is that the idea?
Maybe it was again, I wasn't around at the decision time, but from what
I was involved in that hearing.
Yeah.
And the rationale is there's a ton of oil underneath the fence.
Yeah.
That's why they're allowed to do it.
But why didn't they go for the whole thing?
Because
you can make a compromise in the middle.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I think because they recognize that there was an environmental impact, and this would be
I mean, they were hoping to get away with it.
that it was a token gesture.
Yeah.
It seems on the surface like, oh nice, they'll protect half of it, but like to do so is like so difficult. It feels like a compromise that was made to sort of seem like they're being somewhat environmentally conscious maybe, but I also think it creates not that I feel bad for Suncor, but it must create a headache for them, to be like, oh, we only get to mine half of this, but have to come up with this plan. I don't, yeah, it's a strange one for sure.
Oh, the optics are better to do half.
Yeah.
rather than both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll probably, if they do have it, they'll probably wreck the other half.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see how this is going to be successful.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, AWA has always advocated for protecting the whole thing. Like, again, it's not about whether the unmined half is destroyed, like, that is our regulatory avenue in here. That's like what we've been focusing on, because that's in the approval condition. But we always advocate for protecting the whole area, like, it shouldn't be mine. You know, even losing half of it is gonna be a massive loss, so. You said there's more questions.
Another question, didn't the 2002 agreement say the operational plan had to be submitted at least 6 years before development?
Yeah, so there's been various versions of the operational plan. There was a version that was submitted, I think, in 2012, that was asked to be like it was insufficient, it was judged as insufficient, and so it had to be retooled. Also, part of the issue with this, as like sort of the free market and the ebbs and flows and the boom and bust cycle of the economy that's reliant on energy and oil and gas. This project has changed hands so many times. It was True North Energies, then it was it was owned by Petro-Canada for a while, and then you know, Suncor bought Petro-Canada, and now it's owned by Suncor. So it's changed a lot in the last like 22 years.
I was thinking, do you think there's any merit in having people try and connect with the agricultural community? Because climate change does impact farming, and we saw a lot of drought in southern Alberta. This is going to release a ton of carbon. Like, why are we and farmers paying for emissions that really big companies can just do and not care about it? And
Yeah.
not pay for it?
Yeah, so in terms of like specifically targeting sort of like farmers or agriculture, like it's not, it is a piece of the bigger puzzle of just sort of like getting this across to the community as a whole. So yeah, you're right, like that would be a good sort of like group within sort of broader society that should be sort of informed on these issues. But like we already sort of face hurdles with even getting this information across to those who were probably even kind of tuned in. So like, yeah, totally. We haven't targeted farmers, but we do comms and educational stuff in general, because yeah, you're right. It's gonna take an intersectional approach, an all hands on deck approach, to recognize that digging this thing up, that like nobody is around, like none of us are beside it day to day, but we should all consider that as an important thing, and it needs protection for not just the people from that area, but for us too. Yeah.
So Philip, here in the Wildlands Advocate, page 14, you've got, in March 2020, Colorado public health officials announced the Suncor would be charged $9 million as part of a settlement for multiple air pollution violations going back to 2017. So I think if that information gets into the local media, that will help us.
Yeah, I think there's, so I've actually connected with, so there's for those of you who aren't up to speed on this story, in Colorado, there's a Suncor refinery in just sort of northeast of Denver in a place called Commerce City. And it's just really like a suburb of Denver. And this refinery has been operating, and they've been sort of found in violation of both like air and water pollution, sort of on multiple occasions. There's a Indigenous / Latinx like a NGO, like kind of like an AWA, that focuses on sort of social justice issues related to the Indigenous and sort of like Latin community that lives in and around there. It's a very like economically repressed suburb of Denver, so they've done a lot of good work to sort of highlight these issues. The organization is called Cultivando. I've reached out to their executive director. Her name's Olga. She's been great. She's like, she's happy that I'm amplifying her. She's just like always, I give her updates on what we're doing, because it's kind of like, the point of that article is really just to highlight this isn't just an Alberta thing. Like Suncor are kind of doing stuff elsewhere in other jurisdictions that is noteworthy, especially as we, you know, continue to rely on them for business here in Alberta. Yeah, I would love if it was making more local news. I think if we could get more people to recognize that this is like a multinational corporation that's based in Calgary, you know, it's headquartered there. So the things that are happening in Colorado, or those decisions are probably being made like in Calgary. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, I tried to get a little bit of it out in that article, but if we could get local news to cover it too, it would be helpful, I think. Yeah.
Well,
A couple of questions. One was actually, why were the Americans interested? But maybe that was partly answered with that. You had two experts from the US, which I thought was interesting, and
Oh, sure.
from our U of A.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wondered whether they were actually peatland ecologists or something. The other question I have is, what are your next steps?
Yeah.
You're waiting for this, and this decision you're waiting is just to reconsider, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not to
Yeah.
stop it or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, two things, yeah, so, Kelman Weeder from Villanova University, who was working in sort of the oil sands monitoring program, he is a peatland expert. So he's done tons of work in sort of northern Alberta, boreal ecology, peatlands, so, yeah, he specifically, that's his sort of focus, so I'm glad he was able to sort of get involved, raise a voice. CBC, he did an interview for CBC last week for that story, which I emailed him the other day just thanking him because I didn't know that was happening. So having his support has been extremely helpful. And then, yeah, next steps. Yeah, so while we wait for this reconsideration, you know, there's always work. We're like putting out news releases to try and get media attention, like press releases. Because if a story takes off, like the CBC one did this week, it actually got a fair bit of attention. It resulted in other interviews as well. That helps. But yeah, if let's say the AER decides to proceed with the reconsideration, or even we get to the point where they revoke their approval. Again, that's just them revoking their approval for the operational plan. So it's like I'm under no assumption that it's shutting down the mine completely. Like it's if anything, I assume that the next step would maybe be, and again, this is on the optimistic side, if we get the reconsideration, revoke, they'll probably tell Suncor to do better work and resubmit. And then maybe that just means it's a delay. Maybe that, I don't know how many years that takes, how much work that is for them. But as the economics shift, maybe the more we can even delay, maybe the less economically feasible it is for them to go in. If we push this again, kick the can 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, I don't know, but it's better than the mining next year. So
any delay is a win.
Yeah, totally.
Any delay is
Yeah,
absolutely.
so that's kind of how I see it in my optimistic but still realistic scenario. In my like idealist scenario, the AER would be like, okay, no more mining in the front, but
Oh, no more oil sand development.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
The government that says,
yeah,
sorry, no more.
yeah, I'm just hoping that when we do get a decision back, that at least the reconsideration continues. It's not just like we recognize what you submitted, but it has no merit or something like that would be the worst case scenario. But yeah,
Phillip, is there another carbon sink as big as this one in Canada?
there are, yeah, I mean, this is big, but the boreal region, just in general, like is just like tons of peatlands, so tons of carbon storage. The biggest I think in Canada is technically the Hudson's Bay lowlands in Ontario. So where all the sort of like battle right now is over the Ring of Fire developments for like I think it's for like rare metal mining for like electric vehicle batteries, that kind of thing. So that's a fight going on in Ontario right now. But Lorna Harris, who helped do our review, she also helped an Indigenous community on their battle there. So yeah, it's one of many carbon sinks. And again, it's not just peatlands. Peatlands are just significant in terms of land-based carbon storage. Peatlands only occupy about 3% of our whole land mass on Earth, but they store 30% of our soil carbon. So they're like
That's really old, stores carbon, like
Yeah.
old growth forest, redwoods are an example.
Yeah,
Because carbon gets turned into the cell walls of plant tissue.
yeah,
So it's just like prairies, old prairies,
Yeah.
which the US has like very little.
Yeah.
Marshes, old growth forests, like any ecosystem that's allowed to evolve and develop really, really well over time. That's where our carbon goes.
And also because it's such high carbon storage, that also factors into why there's so much fossil fuels in that area. It's the same.
Did you have a question?
I did.
Yeah.
So I'm not really familiar with the approvals process. I was wondering if there's been a reclamation plan to date, and if there's a possibility to critique the reclamation plan on the basis that there hasn't been successful peatland reclamation
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
oil sands region.
Yeah, that's a really good, like angle, and it's something that like I definitely thought about, but in terms of just like the capacity to, it's just another thing that, we have to get an expert paid to review. So in that operational plan, the Suncor submitted, I think I pulled up here. Okay, so it's 1,900 pages and it's split into these 6 objectives. And one of the objectives later on is about sort of reclamation. So our review with Kelly and Lorna focused on the first 4 objectives, sort of like the baselines they went with, how they understood the ecosystem, the proposed plan to actually mine and their mitigation strategy with the wall. That is sort of where we had the earliest focus on. So yeah, there's still parts of this operational plan that like we haven't even had a chance to dive into. And yeah, you're right, like we have reclaimed 1 square kilometer of the oil sands so far, and it's not even like, yeah, it's not really equivalent land capability either way. It's just 1 square kilometer of the oil sands has been certified by the AER as reclaimed to date. And
I
so,
think the
yeah,
public doesn't know that.
yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, you're right. It is another avenue for us to pursue. Maybe we'll see where this decision goes. Again, it's just about, we're a small NGO. We've got 4 people on our conservation staff. And we don't necessarily have the same resources or capacity as like a billion a quarter company like Suncor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sherry?
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today as well. Phillip, you and Amy Tucker were an awesome component to learning a lot about the fen. I was one of the canoeists who went on the water. In fact, I was one of the persons who walked on the fen. So my question is really about how can we as a collective become more involved in this? And is anybody aware of the lower Athabasca region, which is actually the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan, or LARP? We can make recommendations that will affect a lot of these resource decisions, and we need to consider that as part of sort of, I guess, our public outcry for this. The LARP is affected because the Athabasca River is within like not even 40 kilometers of this fen.
Yeah.
And is a part of this fen. And so I think it's a deliberate attempt on our part in trying to find out a bit more about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think AWA submitted comments on we call it LARP, LARP, the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan. We submitted comments on, it came up for review this year, or last.
It's still in review.
Yeah, it's still in a review
10
phase.
years.
And so the Lower Athabasca Regional Plan is the land use plan that the province of Alberta used to sort of dictate like what activities can happen on the landscape. And there have been numerous groups, including Indigenous communities, who have pointed out that LARP hasn't done anything to actually limit development. And so it is not doing anything to sort of manage or minimize cumulative effects in the region. And so LARP is up for review. You can submit comments. They've got this crazy survey that takes like a map to find your way through. Don't like, you can also just submit letters. So
9
don't like,
outcomes.
yeah, it was, I answered as much as I could, but it was still like a week of my time. And this is the thing, it makes it, they make it really difficult for sort of the average person, like who out there is just like working, gets home and is like, I want to do a survey that's going to take a week. Like, and so, yes, this is up for review. We are hoping there will be changes made, because that again governs what is permitted to happen on the landscape and is supposed to help coordinate. But yeah, it's good for others to know